Hello everyone, it's DuskFairy07. Today we are playing another very powerful Oculus Brew. Okay, so in this build we are playing same cards as in most other Oculus builds. So we got Oculus, Psychic Frog and Unearth. In this build we also got Persist. Persist does a similar job to Unearth in this build. Persisting back Oculus or Psychic Frog is pretty decent, but of course ideally we'd want to persist the Archon of Cruelty as soon as possible. How to do this? We got we got Stitcher Supplier. Stitcher Supplier is pretty cool in this build because Stitcher Supplier great synergy with Abhorrent Oculus. You can play Supplier on turn 1, play your Watery Grave, then turn 2 sacrifice Supplier on Phyrexian Tower and cast the Oculus, hard cast it from your hand on turn 2, and that play is truly amazing and very hard to beat, especially for the energy decks. If they don't have the static prison right at that moment, it can be really overwhelming. Okay, so also persisting the Archon is pretty good against most decks still. And also in the sideboard I got Massacre Worm. This guy can do a great job when you're playing against energy or other creature decks or small creature decks. So when it comes into play, all creatures your opponents control get -2/-2, and then it deals opponent loses 2 life for every creature killed, and we both know how many creatures can energy have. This can sometimes just be lethal just by bringing this guy in play. Also 6 mana, you have Phyrexian Tower, so basically you can hard cast this thing on turn 5, which seems pretty doable. Also a Toxic Deluge and 2 Shot the Sheriff in the sideboard. Yeah, it's pretty good. So my Massacre Worm was my choice of a secondary reanimate target because Boros energy and Mardu energy are just like 30% of the metagame or something like that. And Stitcher Supplier works great in this build. We got also an Emperor of Bones as another way to reanimate in this deck. Also the sweet play that happened to me already once was on turn 3, discard the Emperor, discard the Archon of Cruelty. I did not have Persist, but I had Emperor in hand and I had Unearth. So I discard Emperor, discard Archon of Cruelty, unearth the Emperor, then exile the Archon with Emperor ability, pay 2 mana on turn 3 and bring back Archon with haste for basically immediate win. And that was pretty cool, and it seems like it could happen. But we only got 2 Unearths in this build and 2 Emperor of Bones, and I am very happy with the numbers in this brew so far. So I got 4 Considers, a bit of cantripping to find the pieces we need. Also sometimes can put card in the yard. Fatal Push as my only removal here, as Archon Cruelty often helps with creatures. Oculus also good against creatures, helping, jumping if needed, stuff like that. Sink into Stupors, 2 of them. Okay, so also in this build, as you can see, I have 2 Phyrexian Towers, which can be a bit awkward since this is a counterspell deck, but they work so well with Stitcher Supplier that it's a shame to not play them. And yeah, okay, so Unearth is pretty good in this build, but I only have 2 because I have 4 Persist, and we can also use Persist in similar way to the Unearth. Okay, so pretty happy so far with this build. It performed amazing. We are going to go through the league and see how that went. I'm definitely interested in adding a 3rd consign to the sideboard, but still looking what I want to remove. It's possibly like I don't know, maybe like Toxic Deluge or 2nd Massacre or something like that. Yeah, but definitely interested in bringing in 3rd consign. Okay, so that is it. We can go now to the gameplay, but before that, let me just remind you of my Decktionary profile. You can find a link down below in the video description, and on my Decktionary is you could go to the creators, YouTubers, Duckfaden, and here you have 3 support tiers, and medium tier and guide tier are like where most of my content is situated. So in the medium tier, you got Domainzu sideboard guide, Mardu Energy sideboard guide, all updated last week, and the Mardu Bombardment sideboard guide updated last month. In the guide tier, I got a new, fresh from this week, Dimir Froculus sideboard guide, and also there is this tips and large tips and tricks article for energy in zoo. A lot of my thoughts in that article about most common matchups for energy and zoo in the current metagame. Okay, so that is it. Now we can go check out the gameplay and see how that went. All my games ended up 2-0 except the trophy match. We are going to go through the entire league and see how the deck performed, and it was pretty sweet. I really liked how the deck played out. Okay, so first match I was playing against Amulet. Okay, so I play Flooded Strand. I have Consider. I can play Consider, or I can go for the Survey Land. My opponent plays turn 2 Spell Lunking and passes the turn. I go for a Surveil, put another land in the yard and pass the turn. So now I'm just holding the counter spell, seeing what will my opponent do. This could be the turn when they play the One Ring or something like that. Okay. Opponent takes a bunch of mana and just makes a construct token, nothing special, then goes for the Arboreal Grazer, puts another Saga in the field, so no need to use counterspell for now. So I go for another Survey Land, this time I decide to put counterspell in the yard, and I needed something to deal with the construct tokens since that was their obvious game plan. So I fatal push the construct token and again pass the turn holding counterspell plus Tainted Indulgence. Okay, so my opponent plays land, obviously attempting to just create another construct. As you can see here, I put Oculus in the yard, I find a land, persist the Oculus, and again pass the turn holding counterspell the entire time. Okay, so my opponent here makes a construct token. I manifest in their upkeep. Opponent makes another construct and finds a third Amulet of Vigor. And there is a third Urza Saga too. And opponent goes in for 5. At this time I decide to take 5, and it's not a big deal at this moment for me. I go for... I turn up the Psychic Frog, then discard the Archon of Cruelty, persist the Archon of Cruelty. My opponent discards a card, sacrifices a Grazer, and now I can attack with both Frog and Oculus. My opponent decides not to block, so I discard another card on Frog, draw a card here, find another land and pass the turn. My opponent has 2 attackers, but I have 1 blocker in manifested blocker. I have counterspell, Tainted Indulgence, so feeling pretty good right now. Opponent goes for the Hedge Maze, does the Surveilling, gets mana to pool, plays 6 mana for Primeval Titan, but I have my counterspell which I saved to use on that, and my opponent is on 9, so I have enough flying damage to beat them here. So that is the game. Opponent concedes, so let's check out game 2. Let's also check out the sideboarding plan in the matchup against Amulet Titan. As you can see, I boarded out both Emperors, all the Fatal Pushes, 1 Oculus, 1 Unearth, and 1 Tainted Indulgence. So I bring in Consigns, I bring in Force of negations. Also shoot the sheriff instead of the fatal pushes. Shoot the sheriff, of course, kills the primeval titan and the Dryad Arbor, so both of their best creatures. Here I shock in the Watery Grave. I kept one lander, so I immediately found the second land, so I was happy with that. Not need to use Consider Still. Opponent just makes a construct token and passes the turn. So end of turn I go for the Tainted Indulgence, trying to find another land. I find a land, I have plenty of interactions, so I have Consign, I have Consider, Shoot the Sheriff, so everything I need here. I decide to consign their Urza Saga ability, which gets them the amulet, and I also consign the second amulet they casted from hand. Okay, so here I go for another surveil land, put Persist in the yard. My opponent right now fears that I could possibly play Oculus for 3 mana because I had 6 cards in the yard, and they use Endurance immediately on their turn, but that ended up not being good for them because I played the Supplier, find the Archon in the yard, immediately persisted, and basically finished this game in that way. Okay, so okay, here I am attacking with Archon. Opponent has to sack construct, has to discard a card, and I go for Tainted Indulgence, putting another Archon in the yard, and opponent draws a card and concedes. So that is a match against Amulet Titan in match 1. So let's check out match 2. Okay, so playing first, keeping pretty decent hand. I have Consider, Tainted Indulgence, I have Fetch to go for Surveillance. This time I decide to just use Consider on turn 1, since I had double Tainted Indulgence at that point. So my opponent puts Wish in the yard, so at this point it's clear that they are playing Storm. So I'm focused on finding my counterspell. Or Sink into Stupor is like also decent, but I would definitely prefer counterspell. So I go for Tainted Indulgence, trying to find the spells I need, still don't have them. And yeah, I go for the Stitcher Supplier. And I decide to bluff like a counterspell in this situation. So I just keep 2 blue mana open, and opponent plays Questing Druid ability and passes the turn. So I go for the Phyrexian Tower here and I play another Persist, really trying to dig this Archon of Cruelty from the yard. I finally find it and decide to use the Emperor of Bones to get this to put Archon in the play, dealing a lot of damage to my opponent, putting them down on 4. So my opponent is down on 4, which means next turn I have lethal on board. My opponent goes for a Ral and loses 3 Ral abilities in a row, which puts them down on 1, so they can't really risk it anymore. They have to flip Ral when they won the ability first time. So opponent flips Ral, but it can't do the -8 ability, and they try to find more fuel to go off. They play 11 spells, but that is not enough. And yeah, opponent got stuck on cards, and that was game 1. Let's check out game 2. Also, let's check out the sideboarding plan against a Storm. So in post-board game, I have much better odds. So all 3 Force of Negations go out. I remove Emperors. Unearths, 1 Tainted Indulgence, 1 Oculus. To fit in, of course, the Nihil Spellbombs and Force of Negations. So I go turn 1 for Nihil Spellbomb. Turn 2 I decide to go for the Stitcher Supplier. I find Archon, put it in the yard, which is great news for my Persist next turn. I'll also have Nihil Spellbomb plus Force of Negation backup, which is great in a situation like this. Okay, so opponent passes the turn, they don't try to go for it. So I can easily just persist the Archon, hold the Force of Negation for their turn, make them discard a card here. Then when I untap next time, I can find have a counter spell. So that's pretty good for me. Opponent plays Questing Druid, goes for the Ruby Medallion, and I decide to force it. And the next turn, I'm untapping with another counter spell, doing another Archon ability. So I have Fatal Push for the Ral, I have a counter spell for whatever they play, and yeah, that's pretty bad situation for the opponent, so that is game over. That is match 2, so let's check out match 3. Okay, so in the match 3 I keep a 1-lander, but I have turn 1 Surveil, turn 2 Consider, so that are pretty nice odds to succeed in finding that second land. I find it immediately, so turn 2, first I go for the Supplier, then play the second Surveil land, find the third land on top, I'm pretty happy with that. I have Oculus in the yard, I can persist the Oculus. I can even go for the Consider before that, try to find another Archon. Opponent plays Explore, which means they're obviously playing the Valakut deck. So here I go for the Consider and persist the Oculus. Start attacking my opponent, manifesting in their upkeep. It's a pretty strong clock. And my opponent is only on 4 mana right now, so they need a couple more turns to get to Escape Shift. And yeah, here on my turn 4 I reanimate the Archon and pass the turn, so my opponent is, if they don't do something relevant, they're in a bad situation for the next turn. So they play another 1 ring and they chain rings. That is best thing to do in this situation. And here I go for the Tainted Indulgence. I play my 5th land and pass the turn holding Sink into Stupor. My opponent loses life on the 1 ring. And then they go for the Dryad. I should have gone for Sink into Stupor on Dryad immediately. They tapped out a lot of their lands. And yeah, they play Explore and kill my Archon with Mountain. And but here it's not a big problem for me. I have Emperor of Bones, and Emperor of Bones here can put Archon with haste on the field, which ends this game immediately. So that is the game. 1 against Escape Shift. So let's check out game 3 and the sideboarding plan against Escape Shift deck. Okay, so 1 Indulgence out, 1 Unearth, all the 3 pushes. 1 Unearth, 1 Emperor of Bones, 1 Consider, 1 Oculus. A lot of one-offs. I wanted to bring in Harbinger of the Seas, I wanted to bring in Force of Negation. That is already a lot of cards, and I replaced the Fatal Pushes with Shoot the Sheriffs. Okay, so here I'm playing my land, holding multiple cards in this situation, so I can go for a counterspell, I can go for the Shoot the Sheriff. I decide to hold the counterspell in my hand and instead just play Shoot the Sheriff on the Dryad and then untap and have available mana for counterspell and Force of Negation. I decide to go for the Harbinger of the Seas. My opponent doesn't have the Valakut abilities with Harbinger of the Field, of course. And they also don't have a green mana. A lot of their spells is green. So here I go for a Stitcher Supplier, mill Archon in the graveyard, and I have Persist, but I have to wait next turn to cast the Persist. I have a Force of Negation, and I go for the Consider end of their turn, finding another consign to memory. So I go for the Persist, make them discard a card, and find a really amazing clock, while at the same time I was still able to hold 2 mana for counterspell plus Force of Negation, so my opponent absolutely doesn't have any chance in this moment. Okay, so opponent passes another turn, but yeah, that is game over. They discard another card, and yeah, I have put them down on 1, but yeah, that is just they can't do anything about that. So that is the game, and that is the match against Escape Shift. So let's check out match 4. All 2-0 wins so far, and let's check out match 4. I kept a 1-lander in this match 4, but I had a Consider, so I think that is doable. I also find a second Consider, that's great. Immediately find a land from the top, and yeah, I can try here. My opponent probably holding some kind of counterspell, but I can try to play the Psychic Frog, try to put it in the yard. Opponent has a Spell Snare, so that doesn't go through. Opponent finds Elegant Parlor, which means they are Jeskai energy. I go for Unearth, play the Consider. In response to Consider, opponent plays Galvanic Discharge. I discard 2 cards. One discard was very free, it was Archon of Cruelty, and I didn't want to discard more when they played the second discharge, so I just let the frog die. I put Oculus on top of my library. I have Persist for Archon, and it's just brutal here. Make them discard their last card, and then also kill the Teferi with the ability from Archon. Opponent bounces the Teferi, and but I was able to kill the Teferi and play the Abhorrent Oculus. So Oculus is also amazing clock. Here, if I ever get another mana, I can go Psychic Frog, discard Archon, play the Persist. But it's not needed, I just pass the turn holding a Fatal Push plus Counterspell. My opponent plays Gifts Ungiven, and but I decide to counter that. They obviously can play a Divine Reclamation from their graveyard, but I'm okay with that. Opponent plays the Teferi, brings back the Teferi, bounces one of my creatures, but I'm able to flip the manifested Oculus and finish them off on this same turn. So that is the game. Let's check out the game 2. Also, let's check out the sideboarding plan against Jeskai, Gifts Ungiven. It's not a classic Jeskai in control, but a Gifts Ungiven version that also did well in some tournaments. Pretty interesting lists, actually. Seems very fun. Okay, so we can see here I boarded out all the Fatal Pushes. I didn't even bring in the Shooter Sheriff. They don't have, in this version, they don't have much creatures or even any, maybe just a Snapcaster's Mage. Okay, so I also boarded out 1 Unearth, all the pushes as I already said, 1 Emperor of the Bones, so 2 graveyard related pieces go to the yard. Here I play the Nihil Spellbomb and still hold the counterspell. This is the turn that they play their strong spells, so I definitely want to keep the counterspell. I decide to exile their graveyard and play the Consider, try to find more lands. And here I go for the Spellbomb. Opponent plays Gifts Ungiven, but I decide to counterspell that, play the Nihil Spellbomb and pass the turn. Okay, my hand is pretty good. I have enough cards in my yard, so I can play the Oculus. I can also play Psychic Frog or Emperor of the Bones. I decide to go for the Oculus this turn, remove 6 cards from my yard to play the Oculus, and then Oculus finds Archon of Cruelty. This is good news because of my Emperor of the Bones. Emperor of the Bones in this situation can very easily just win the game. So I go for the Emperor of the Bones ability to exile Archon, but opponent this time has Celestial Purge, so I'm not able to put Archon on the field just yet. Opponent plays the I play the Psychic Frog, opponent plays the Snapcaster, tries to target Celestial Purge, but I have a Nihil Spellbomb on the field. I can't draw a card, but yeah, that's fine. Again, manifesting in their upkeep, this time finding another Oculus, which is amazing, and if opponent didn't kill the frog, I will have the kill on the next turn just with flyers. So I pay 3 mana. Okay, so I pay 3 mana, flip the Oculus, put them down on 1 and play the Psychic Frog, then go for the double manifest, and my opponent can't find a solution for all of this, so that is game over. Okay, so that is a win in match 4. All the wins I did 2-0 in all the wins so far, so pretty strong performance by the deck. And time to check out the match 5 for the trophy. I played against Eldrazi Ramp, one of the best decks right now, and it's certainly good against Dimir. Dimir always struggles with Eldrazi decks, and but it's maybe a bit easier if you're playing this version with Archon, but it's still, Dimir definitely has some problems, and I should probably consider adding at least a third consign. Okay, so as you can see here, I had a pretty sweet line going turn 3, discard Archon, unearth Emperor, and then bring back Archon with Emperor with haste, which in this situation, this makes me deal like 11 damage to them, and I can also pump my Psychic Frog to almost go for the lethal. It's actually is lethal. It's actually is lethal. I had a possible lethal next turn, but my opponent unfortunately kills my land, so I was not able to go for that plan. I decide to discard the Archon and the Oculus in this situation. I go for the consider, and since my first plan didn't go well, I decide to unearth the Oculus this turn. And I also manifest a second Oculus. So that is a lot of damage, and that is potentially just a win next turn if I flip the second Oculus. And I have the lethal on the board if my opponent doesn't do anything. But unfortunately, my opponent has a crazy hand where they were able to turn 3 kill my land for 6 mana with Myco Spine, and then turn 4 Hardcast Wardbreaker to exile another land. Okay, so unfortunately my Oculus was not able to attack here, and I was only able to attack with Frog. Discard 2 cards, go in for 5 damage, draw a card with Psychic Frog and pass the turn, manifesting another card, another creature. Opponent plays the One Ring, good timing. They are on 10 right now. And I draw a counterspell for a turn, which was pretty decent. So this turn they have protection from the One Ring. And I'm building a big board here, a lot of creatures on the field. My Psychic Frog is large, so a lot of good things here. Unfortunately, my opponent plays Ancient Stirrings and finds the Emrakul of the Promised Land, and they have exactly enough mana to cast it. Yeah, and the Emrakul, I do have a counterspell here, but Emrakul is still a big problem. And I discarded my entire hand. It just makes no sense to give my opponent any options. So here I go for the opponent controls my turn right now. So yeah, they did well. They did really well because they didn't just sack the fetch and went for no find, but they instead they find the Undercity Sewers and removed Sink into Stupor from top of my deck. If they didn't do this, then I would possibly have lethal next turn because I would just Sink into Stupor, World Breaker, and they would lose a flyer attacker, and I will be able to just possibly find some way to do additional damage. Okay, so here unfortunately my opponent exiled all the cards from my library, so I didn't have enough to give Psychic Frog flying there, which means my opponent still had a Wall Breaker on the field. They lose 2, they go down on 5 life, and they have the One Ring here with 3 counters, so they are still not in the secure zone, but they find another One Ring and yeah, draw more cards, and now they're able to attack with World Breaker, have a bunch of cards in hand, so I'm in a pretty bad situation. And but I do find Oculus from the top. I play Oculus, put another strong attacker, which makes another strong attacker here. So my opponent is on 4 and losing 2 life in their upkeep. So I have a bunch of options here, but I have to block with both Oculus and Frog to be able to survive their Casting Wolf run. And unfortunately my opponent again has not only Emrakul but also the One Ring to get protection plus Emrakul, which means game over for me. So that's it. Let's check out game 2. Okay, so in game 2, I start off with a decent hand with a lot of counters, but unfortunately no creature. Opponent also starts well with Utopia Sprawl. I go for a Surveil and put a Phyrexian Tower in the yard. Then play another Surveil, put Archon in the yard. So now what I need to do is find that Persist, definitely, or Emperor of the Bones. Okay, opponent plays the Ancient Stirrings and go for the Soulless Jailer. So I really have to consign this since I already have Archon in the yard, and Persist would probably just win me the game in a situation like this. My opponent tries to go for Ancient Stirrings. Maybe this wasn't a greatest idea, but I went for Force of Negation there on Ancient Stirrings, allowing my opponent here to go for the Kozilek's command. I had another Archon in my hand, so I didn't care that much about my opponent exiling the Archon from the yard, but they did get 2 Eldrazi Scion tokens, which allows them to get more mana. And opponent is somehow again able to hardcast the Emrakul, the Promised Land, so early in the game, and unfortunately my opponent, I had Phyrexian Tower, and that's actually unfortunately meant that my opponent can play the Oculus and sacrifice it with my own Phyrexian Tower, which unfortunately kills my only threat, and my top deck wasn't good. It's just another polluted Delta, but I do have Force of Negation. My opponent doesn't have much mana, so it's a top deck mode and even battle in this situation. So I'm holding Force of Negation, unfortunately drawing into 2 lands in a row here. No more Surveillance. So waiting for some relevant top deck. Opponent plays Trinisphere, but at this point Trinisphere just feels irrelevant. I have so much mana anyway, so it's really not that important. And I top deck a counter spell, so 2 counters right now feels pretty good. Now what I need to do is find a creature, definitely. Just find a creature. I go for another land, find consider, but decide against playing consider on my turn because this would disallow me from double spelling 2 counters on their turn, going like Force of Negation plus counterspell if I play consider on my turn, of course. Opponent goes for a rumble, and this is where I do the biggest mistake. In response to that, opponent goes for Kozilek's command, and I should have gone for a counterspell on command. Instead, I let them resolve that after countering the rumble, and they find the shifting woodlands. Yeah, I didn't really think of that, and that was really a big problem here. Shifting woodland at this point can reanimate Emrakul from the yard, and you can see me here just finding Harbinger of Souls plus Oculus Manifested. Unfortunately, I missed 1 mana here to turn the Harbinger, but my opponent finds a perfect top deck in this situation. Kozilek's Return to kill my Harbingers. I find Persist and put a Harbinger back into play with 2 Oculus on the field, which means lethal next turn plus counterspell in my hand. So the only thing I have to do is my opponent for 1 turn doesn't top deck the 7 mana spell to trigger the Kozilek's Return. Unfortunately, they do exactly that. Kill my land, I counter the wall breaker, but yeah, the damage is done. And now they have shifting woodlands again. I find a Shoot the Sheriff, but Shoot the Sheriff can't stop the Emrakul because it has protection from instants. So I can't do anything about that. That's game over. And yeah, but pretty close game where opponent had done amazing value with Kozilek's Return. And pretty good performance for the Dimir Reanimator. I felt very good with Archon being able to play it out early thanks to the Stitcher Supplier, Consider, Surveillance, and Psychic Frog. We are able to put to put Archon on the field in the early turns even before the ring decks can play the One Ring. So I also like how Stitcher Supplier plays so well with Oculus. They are like a perfect fit. Supplier with Phyrexian Tower especially mills all 6 cards needed to hardcast the Oculus, and Phyrexian Tower provides you mana to do it on turn 2. It's a super powerful play to do that stuff on turn 2, and it's almost like unlosable for the player who does that. Okay, so the Psychic Frog, another decent Persist target, great with Unearth, and a great enabler for this deck, and it's even better in this build than it is in others because it's enabler which puts Archon in the yard, then you use Persist to basically win the game. Okay, this deck actually plays out pretty similarly to GORYO's, but since we have Persist in this build and with such a strength from Oculus, and the synergy in a build like this where we can use a Stitcher Supplier, Phyrexian Tower to cast it early, Surveillance, consider surveilling stuff in the yard, making your Oculus easier to cast. These all work well with Reanimator strategy. Persisting Archon of Cruelty, because Persisting Oculus is also pretty good, as you could see in the league. Unfortunately, I did not play against Boros Energy, so did not test Massacre Worm. I really wanted to draw Massacre Worm against them and do a lot of damage by hard casting or reanimating it. And yeah, that's it. That is the entire league. Hope you like the league. Hope you like the gameplay. A friendly reminder to click like, click subscribe, comment down in the video. What do you think of this Reanimator deck? Is this, do you think, how do you rate this build of Dimir Oculus in comparison to the classic Demir Froculus build, or the one from with Nethergoyf from my channel last week, or some other Oculus builds like Soul Trader or the Grabvine. I had a bunch of them in the past 2 weeks on my channel, and so really want to hear your comments. How do you rate this build in comparison to those? Could this be the best Oculus build? I think Froculus, the classic Froculus, is the best overall deck because it plays all the good stuff cards good on their own, but this deck does some powerful stuff like persisting Archon or Oculus in the early turns with the help of a Stitcher Supplier, and this can help you really end games quickly. Also, as you saw, Emperor of the Bones, pretty cool. This, I love this card from the MH3 that has such a cool use. It's even better in this build than it is in the GORYOs because Archon does the ability when it attacks, and it's so cool to give Archon to get hasted Archon with Emperor of the Bones. That is truly amazing. And yeah, that's it. I really like the sideboard. As I said, I'm definitely interested in adding third consign, but still want to play a bit more before I decide what I want to take out for the third consign. So that's it. Okay, hope you like the gameplay. Again, thank you for watching this far. That is it for today, and goodbye.